Okay, this will be the fourth part of the ongoing series on the history of the Russian Germans. Hopefully this one will be shorter than the last couple, especially the last one, which went on for a while, longer than I thought, got up to almost a half an hour. I'd like to keep these things a little bit shorter if possible. This one I'm going to be doing a rather limited period of time, the period of World War I, between its start in 1914 and the February 1917 revolution, with the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II, his going into exile internally in the Russian Empire before his assassination by the Bolsheviks, along with his family. So it's not a huge chronological spread. World War I, of course, pitted the Russian Empire against Germany, as well as the German-speaking Austrian state. That by that time, the dual kingdom of Austro-Hungary, Hungary becoming equalized as a kingdom within the Habsburg Empire after 1848. So after the assassination in Sarajevo in Bosnia of the Archduke, Austria declared war on Serbia for backing the organization of which the assassin was a member, and then Russia came to the assistance of Serbia by invading Austria, and Germany came to the assistance of its Austrian ally by attacking the Russian Empire. And then, of course, the Germans also attacked Belgium and France, and the British came to support the French, and the Germans, along with the Ottomans, make an attack along the southern areas of the Russian Empire, both by sea and by land. So at this point then, the central powers, the main powers are fighting are Germany, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire on one side, and then the Russian Empire, France, and Great Britain on the other side. Now, the Russian Germans, as I noted, after the unification of Germany in 1871, the revocation of privileges is in part an attempt to remove their separate status. There's also a mandatory introduction of Russian language instruction in schools in the German colonies. The end of the immunity from conscription means that many ethnic German young men serving in the Russian military are also becoming linguistically acclimated into the Russian language as well. So you have a movement here towards bilingualism from purely German-speaking colonies, or dialects of German. Obviously, it's a bit complicated. Generally, they would speak a dialect at home, and then the German school run by the village and through the church would have instruction on Hochdeutsch. And then finally, there's this Russification campaign to teach Russian language for those people who were enrolled in school. But the idea of the Germans being Trojan horse for the new German state, the Second Reich, reaches a pinnacle for the Russian Empire. It will get much worse under the Soviets with regard to the Third Reich in the Second World War. In World War I, it's kind of a catalyst here. The idea that all German people must have some cultural essence that binds them together, and that is reflected in political loyalties towards a German state. In this case, the Second Reich out of Berlin. Now, this is Uh, Obviously not true from what we know. The people who left what became Germany to go to the Russian Empire never developed any type of German nationalism. They had uh, a view of themselves that was much more locally orientated, much more orientated upon confession, Lutheran or Catholic or Mennonite, the local villages. But nonetheless, this is one of the things we see developing in the 19th and early 20th centuries in Europe, this idea of uh, nationalism, particularly integral nationalism, where the nation is the highest value placed above anything other out there, that nothing can be greater than the nation, and therefore it can only be assumed that other peoples would also have this idea. So if it becomes inculcated among the Russian nationalists that the Russian nation is the highest, so obviously ethnic Germans, people who are German by culture and descent, must also think the same way with regard to Germany, even if it wasn't true. So what we see also then is the development of total war. Now, for the western part of the war in France, particularly area of Flanders, mostly seen in the concept of trench warfare and the massive battles, including the use of poison gas in places like Verdun, the Somme, Passchendaele. But in the east, it even takes on a worse aspect, and that is the targeting of civilian populations on the basis of their ethnic identity, tying them to foreign states, and deciding to forcibly relocate them en masse. This is, of course, done most ruthlessly and with most brutality in the Ottoman Empire regarding the Armenians, who are forcibly removed from the historical area of eastern Armenia, western Armenia in the eastern Anatolia, into the deserts of Syria and Iraq, where around half of the Armenian population, the Ottoman Empire, 1 million people out of about 2 million, die from various causes, but dehydration, malnutrition, exhaustion, and just massacres are all fairly large contributors to this excessively high mortality rate. And of course, this means that the ancestral Armenian homeland in eastern Anatolia is almost completely depopulated of ethnic Armenians during the First World War, under orders of the CUP government, Committee of Union and Progress, under Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Jamal Pasha. What happened to the ethnic Germans in the Russian Empire during World War I is not nearly as bad as what happened to the Armenians, but it is still quite bad. And in many sense, the mechanisms are similar in the sense that they are forcibly, many of them, removed from their homes and deported within the interior of the Russian Empire to places that are not real well prepared to receive them. There is a high mortality rate, and some areas permanently depopulated of the ethnic German population. And this will be repeated in a way much more similar to what had happened to the Armenians, to the ethnic Germans in Ukraine and the Volga region and other western parts of the Soviet Union during the Second World War. So the main thing here is the Germans consider internal threat. There is a pogrom, a lynching of 3 Germans on 27th of May 1915 in Moscow. A large amount of German property destroyed. And in 1915 and 1916, there's the liquidation laws that prohibit ethnic Germans in the western borderlands of the Russian Empire, in Poland, in western Ukraine, Volhynia, in Bessarabia, from having any ownership or long-term leases of land, and also that they be forcibly removed. Russian military forcibly deports into the Volga region, which is heavily German, about 600,000 Germans by now, and Siberia, about 200,000 ethnic Germans. So there are Germans deported from various western regions of the Russian Empire in 1915 and 1916 into these regions with very little preparation to meet them. Almost none provided by the Tsarist government itself. Almost always by local Germans living in the Volga region or in the Siberian daughter colonies that have been established, as far as there was any. So in 1915 and 1916, there's this ethnic cleansing that's taken place in Volhynia in particular, and also some of the other western regions of the Russian Empire. Some 200,000 Germans deported. Some make it back in the 1920s, but many do not, and many who are deported internally do not survive. I've seen numbers as high as 60,000 deaths. That's probably in excess, but certainly compared to something like the American internment of Japanese during the Second World War, or at the same time as this was happening, the internment of Ukrainians because they were subjects of the Austro-Hungarian Empire coming from Galicia in Canada, the death rates in Tsarist Russia were very high. Obviously, getting any numbers on that at this point is not really possible. We have some numbers that are incomplete for the much more, I said, ruthless and genocidal deportation of ethnic Germans by the Stalin regime during the Second World War. So this is the liquidation laws, and the first mass deportation of ethnic Germans actually occurs before the Bolshevik Revolution, even before the overthrow of the Tsar in the February Revolution in 1917 under Tsar Nicholas II in 1915 and 1916. At the same time, we're seeing similar activities by the Ottomans against the Armenians. We see roundups, although, as I said, much less brutal, although nonetheless considerable violation of civil liberties of ethnic Ukrainians in Canada. So that occurs at this point. And the Tsarist government actually had plans to try and do what the Soviet government ended up doing, and that is extend these deportations that they were undertaking in western Ukraine and Bessarabia and in Poland into the Volga region and deport the Volga Germans eastward as well. But the revolution overthrowing the Tsar and putting the provisional government in power in February 1917 stops this plan. They are not able to implement them. The provisional government pretty much just takes a hands-off position between February and October regarding the ethnic Germans in the Russian Empire. It's too busy trying to survive itself while still fighting a war against Germany and Austria and the Ottomans. And while it can sometimes do well against the Austrians and Ottomans, it's completely outgunned by Germany. So this is a brief period of time, but I think it's kind of a foreshadowing, a word I'm not allowed to use in exams anymore because students were unable to figure out what it means. But I would say that the deportations of the Volhynian Germans, which take place here in World War I, foreshadow the much larger deportation of almost all ethnic Germans that are under Soviet control in August and through October 1941 eastward into Kazakhstan and Siberia, which we'll talk about later. So I just wanted to get that one little tiny historical footnote on the record here. The Tsarist deportation and ethnic cleansing. Volhynian Germans, quite tragic. And I say something that is, I think, a result of the idea of going to total war, targeting civilian populations, and the idea of integral nationalism, the idea that people have some sort of ethnic essence that ties them with everybody of a similar ethnicity and then makes them a legitimate target. And I said that I don't think it's a coincidence this takes place at the exact same time as the Armenian genocide. So I'll leave it at that. That's exactly 15 minutes, so it's about as long as I wanted to go. And next time, hopefully, I'll come up with something different. If not, we can continue into the Soviet era and the never-ending saga of the history of the Russian Germans. Sometimes it seems that way, but trust me, there is an end to history somewhere, or at least to the history as I will experience it. All right, Shoshad.